I'm Autumn Lockett,
And this is Mitch Randall.
and you're listening to Good Faith Weekly.
On this episode of Good Faith Weekly, Autumn and I are going to catch up on this week's activities. We're also going to talk about the importance of music during this pandemic. And in our deeper dive section, we're going to talk about Earth Day as it was commemorated this past week. And then you're not, and trust me when I say this, you're not going to want to miss an interview with Nashville recording artist, singer-songwriter Campbell. Autumn, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing well. It's a little stormy here in Oklahoma. I don't know if the weather people understood that we wanted to cancel tornado season because we're also dealing with a pandemic and it's too much.
Yeah, it is certainly stormy looking outside. In fact, I think some storms are moving out from the west here into the Oklahoma City metro area, and expecting golf ball size hell for those listeners who live in other places of the country that don't experience these kind of spring storms. It gets a little dicey here in Oklahoma in Tornado Alley.
It does, and it's a little tricky because a lot of the spaces in Norman that are public shelters are actually locked because they don't want people congregating because of the pandemic. So, our friends who live in housing that maybe isn't quite as permanent and safe have really been on my heart lately. And I'm just, I don't really know what they do. We're in a completely uncharted territory once again in 2020.
Yeah, 2020 has been quite the year so far. In fact, mentioning those shelters, public shelters for storm areas, I think it was a couple of weeks ago down in Alabama, storms moved through Mississippi and Alabama, actually. And they were encouraging people to stay at home if they needed to, but if they needed to go to a shelter, they were opening some of the shelters, but they had to maintain social distancing within a shelter, which is almost impossible. So certainly strange days we live in. Well, today we want to talk a little bit about music. We're so excited about the interview coming up later in the pod with Nashville recording artist Campbell.
It's our first live music on the podcast.
That's right.
She's going to sing a song for us.
Yeah, she's going to, she selected a song by John Prine, who we lost a few weeks ago, unfortunately, his death. But she had a chance to work with John on several occasions, and she's going to sing one of his songs for us here that we're really, really looking forward to. So you don't want to miss that. So I know you're a big music buff, Autumn. You love all kinds of music. So I'm just going to go ahead and just leap into the deep end. How many times did you watch Phantom of the Opera this week?
Oh my gosh, 3. Not incomplete, not watching the complete one start to finish because it was a weekend and the kids were around. But I love Phantom. It was the first musical that I ever saw live. I saw it in Houston at the Hobby Center. And I don't know if it's because it was my first musical or if it really is just that much of an epic show, but it just has a special place in my heart.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. I think it was the 25th anniversary of the musical, premiering at the West End. I don't know if it was at the West End or not, but the recording was at the Royal Albert Hall in London, and so it was a great performance, wonderfully done. Andrew Lloyd Webber's always a master in his writing, so I knew you'd watch it. I knew you'd watch it more than once. So how have you been? How have you been listening to music? How's music been? Kind of a mechanism for you during this pandemic, because we're hearing story after story. In fact, I was doing a little research before our recording today and just talked about the importance of music during this pandemic. And, it kind of began in Italy. Remember us talking, in fact, we posted about it, I think, at Good Faith Media. I wrote an article about the importance of music and the Italians coming together in northern Italy to sing at their balconies at night, just to connect to one another. And we've seen that all across Europe and even in the United States. In fact, more recently in Barcelona, there was a young man, a pianist, went out on his balcony and started playing a beautiful, beautiful song. And a saxophonist in another building joined in. It was just a lovely moment. And of course, all the buildings started listening and people cheering from their balconies as well. And then also the recording artists are doing live concerts for people to help them pass the time, but also to entertain and encourage them through this pandemic. So how are you letting music into your life during this pandemic?
Yeah, so we have lots of music going on in our house. Our kids are music lovers, play multiple instruments, and we really use music to set the environment in different spaces and to help us transition. I listen to music while I'm working, unless I'm editing one of these podcasts,
Yeah,
of
sure.
course, because you can't listen to music while you're editing. But when I'm doing basically anything else, I have, Spotify going, or radio, something going on. And then when I move into our more public spaces, after work and I'm helping to make dinner or wrangle children, we turn music on. And the difference between having, silence and the sound of kids screaming and music and the sound of kids screaming really does define the environment a little bit.
Absolutely. You know what our favorite things to do even before this pandemic started, but even more so during the pandemic, is when we're cooking dinner at night. We've got a little speaker there in the kitchen, and we play music and cook and talk and just really enjoy it. We're kind of a jazz kind of family. We enjoy all kinds of jazz, and so we have our different Spotify playlists that we go through. Mostly we enjoy New Orleans kind of jazz, or kind of that swing music from World War II. We've been utilizing our speaker in the kitchen quite often recently. It's just been a wonderful, wonderful thing. And then on a rainy day like this, I've got my rainy day jazz that I pop in.
I'm not a big jazz fan. It's a little too open-ended for me. I need a little bit more, I like edges in my music. And so I can never really anticipate where jazz is going. And so as, I've been in band and in jazz bands and in music kind of my whole life. And so I don't know, there's something about the open-ended parameters of jazz that really is unsettling to me. It's like watching Alice in Wonderland. I'm just a little anxious when I listen to jazz.
Well, that probably speaks a whole lot about my mentality then, because, I'm just kind of open-ended and just kind of go with the flow. And, let's see what today brings. Who knows what's going to happen. So, well, good.
I've also used music as a parenting tool, because my kids will receive information through a song much better than they'll receive it from me barking at them. And a couple of years ago, we took a road trip to Florida with 4 children, and it was an adventure for sure. And there are still songs that will pop on our playlist, and we'll be like, oh my gosh, we listened to this our first morning in Baton Rouge, or we listened to this on the way to the beach. And we just have these soundtracks to our lives. And on that trip, I was like, okay, we're not going to yell at the kids. That's like, we're going to work really hard. And yelling a lot of times in our house isn't coming from a place of anger. It's coming from just like the sheer necessity to talk over the din that's going on. But it does just sort of elevate the tension in our house. And so we would sing songs like "Don't Hit Your Sister," "Yes, that sister," "No, not that one," and it just works better than yelling, and they'll listen because it's a song.
That is a much better story than I had going on in my head, because I thought, the way you and Josh use music would be like you walk into a room and they're doing something wrong, and the Darth Vader theme comes on, dun 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 dun.
There's probably some of that too.
Oh. It's funny that you mentioned how music, triggers a memory. This is really going to be telling. Anytime I hear Maroon 5 on the radio, I think about taking the boys to school when they were growing up, because they were on the local radio station at the time, and for some reason they played, one of 2 of their songs, it seemed, for a couple of years, and it always happened as I was taking them to the school, and it was a good memory for me. Well, speaking of music, you want to stay tuned for our interview with singer-songwriter Kate Campbell in our 3rd segment. But coming up next, we're going to take a deeper dive, because this week was Earth Day.
Are you looking for a new way to grow your faith? Nurturing Faith is offering 5 of their best-selling devotionals for only $12 for Good Faith Weekly listeners. Go to nurturingfaith.net to find hope from Carol Bozeman Taylor, John R. Roebuck, Blake McKinney, Michael L. Ruffin, and Merrill J. Davies. The books are all available in the bookstore section of the Nurturing Faith website. And now, back to Mitch and Autumn.
On this week's Deeper Dive, we're going to talk about Earth Day. This past Wednesday was Earth Day all around the world, people commemorating the importance of ecological justice and our place in this world as stewards of the environment. And Autumn, I know we're stuck indoors a lot these days, but do you and your family observe Earth Day in any means?
We've been talking with our kids about conservationism. Actually, It's a word I taught Levy recently, which has been kind of fun.
Yeah.
He is very into nature. We found that the more we can get them outside, the better they are. It just changes their whole countenance to get outside. And we are very, very lucky to live in a neighborhood where we have creeks and we have hills and we have trees and woods. And so we've been getting out and looking at some of the deer tracks and some of the raccoon tracks from sort of the wooded area down to this pond area.
And on Earth Day is always a great opportunity to examine how, we live, how we are engaging the world as good stewards. God put us on this earth to be good stewards of the earth. We have a great responsibility to be caretakers for the world. It is an incredible resource. It's the only resource that we have. And if we are not responsible and taking care of it, then it's going to go away. And Moltmann is the theologian that I've cited before on the program, talking about thinking of the world as a living organism. God created the world, created the earth. And because he created the earth, it is a living, breathing organism. And when any living, breathing organism when any living, breathing organism feels it's in danger of being attacked, then it's going to defend itself. And the only tools the earth has to defend itself is its own resources, and that is through storms, through earthquakes, through ways that it identifies what's attacking it and then tries to, subvert that attack. And so it's a very interesting theory to think about. Speaking of one of those who take it very seriously, at ethicsdaily.com this week, we have a series of columns talking about the importance of ecological justice. One of those it was written by Beale Memorial Baptist Church pastor in Tappahannock, Virginia, Dr. Jonathan Davis. And Dr. Davis talks about how his church last year put solar panels on top of their building, and what that has done not only for them economically, but how it's helped reduce their carbon footprint in Virginia. And for example, he was saying that over a 12-month period since installing the solar panels, their electric bill went from a little over $13,000 annually to $5,600 in this past year, which was remarkable savings. But just think about the benefit that using solar energy has for the environment as well. Do you know of anybody, any churches, any businesses that have made the switch?
I only know sort of people that have used it on their homes. I know there's been some pushback around here. HOAs have been really sticky about them. Mm-hmm. And there has been pushback. That's something that I think we have to deal with because of where we live. There is pushback from people who have a vested interest in not having renewable energy sort of have its place. We've watched this week as oil prices have just tumbled, mm-hmm. and we live in a state that is really impacted by that. And the reactions that I've seen have been a mix of people saying, okay, so we have a lot of sunshine and we have a lot of wind in Oklahoma. What can we do about this? And then just a lot of people just chewing their nails and saying, we've got to wait for oil to come back because it is that boom bust situation right. that people are just accustomed to.
Yeah. And you and your family lived abroad for a while over in Switzerland. And I remember you coming back from Switzerland, and you were very gracious and took my oldest son with you to live with you guys for about 3 months over in Lucerne, Switzerland.
Yeah, I'm waiting for you to take my oldest son.
Where are we going to go? Where should I take him?
I don't care where you take him, just away.
Poor Lev.
Sorry, yes. So, back
No,
to Switzerland.
Yeah, but you were talking. I remember the stories you guys used to tell about how seriously they took recycling over there. Now, here in Oklahoma, over the last decade, they've gotten a lot better at pushing recycling.
Norman.
Yeah, especially here in Norman. But over in Switzerland, it's a whole different ballgame. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we had to learn. In fact, Cole and Ava was 4, Cole was, I think, 13.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to help us because honestly, keeping up with the recycling regime in Switzerland was a full-time job. They would fine you if they found things in your trash bins that could have been composted or recycled. And so you just had to separate it all out. You had to break down any cardboard. There were specific color-coded glass recycling bins in the park where we would take the kids. And so in fact, one of the kids' favorite thing was to hold the glass bottles over and they would drop it. And it wasn't just a bin, it went down into some sort of underground situation. And so you could hear that plunk and just shatter, which is really satisfying. But you you recycled batteries, plastic bags, any kind of milk bottles, egg cartons, things at the grocery store themselves. But there were like 6 different places in the city where you'd have to go to recycle different things. We also had to compost. And I remember one specific moment where Ava blew her nose and she was like, "Mama, I don't know where to put this." So we had to Google where to put used tissues.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
So when we came back, it really made us look at our trash in a different way. And I think once we learned to look at things through those eyes of, okay, here's how we can treat these different things, we've been more responsible with the way that we get rid of things. And our kids are sort of in that same mindset. They love to go through our box of recycling and find ways to reuse things and make all kind of experiments. And they're like raccoons, really.
As I travel across the country, I'm often asked a series of questions. One of those questions is always, what is the most pressing issue for Christians that you address on a routine basis? And I always say the number one issue for us is the environment, because the environment affects everything. It affects all other issues. When the environment goes haywire, when the environment begins to produce famines and storms and fires, then people are put on the move. And so all of a sudden it affects resources, it affects immigration, it affects human migration. And it is still the most important issue that we face as Christians. It's not one that's talked about a lot unless Earth Day rolls around, but it is something that needs to be engaged and discussed on a routine basis. It is, in my opinion, the most important issue that we are facing in our lifetime, because it truly affects everything that we do. And if we do not take our responsibility as caretakers of this world that God has entrusted us with, then we are in trouble. And we need to take it seriously and to do a better job in fighting for ecological justice, not only on a macro level within legislation and global accords, but also on a daily basis, just like we talked about with solar panels, with recycling, with ways that we can reduce our carbon footprint here in the world. Well, that is our deeper dive for the day, and you'll want to stick around because, as we discussed in the first segment, we're going to not only talk about music, but we're going to hear some good music from singer-songwriter Kate Campbell. She's next. Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly, and we are very fortunate to have a very special guest with us today, all the way from Nashville, Tennessee, singer-songwriter Kate Campbell. Kate, welcome to the pod.
Well, thank y'all so much. Yeah, we're so glad to have you here.
Well, Kate, we've been starting every interview with pretty much the same question, and that is, are you surviving this pandemic? How are you getting along in quarantine? And probably most importantly, you feeling okay?
I am. So far, so good. Knock on wood. I have been, lifestyle-wise, it's not that much different for me. It's not that I don't work, but, I'm either driving and singing, or then there are lots of times when you're not doing things like that. You're at home.
Right.
So it's kind of, I'm feeling a little guilty because there are things I need to be working on musically, and I'm kind of doing a little bit here and there, and I keep trying to put myself on the schedule, and I'm not so good at that, watching a lot of TV.
Kate, we find ourselves in a very peculiar situation right now under this pandemic, and everybody behind closed doors, and music is being used across social media platforms, online concerts, to help right now really as a coping mechanism. But music has also historically been used to interpret culture along the way. It's going to be very interesting to see what singer-songwriters create during this very difficult time of our culture. You are very famously known for using your music as a medium to speak into culture, to be prophetic, especially regarding social justice issues. Do you think a situation like we're encountering now gives an opportunity for artists like yourself to help those of us who are not as artistically inclined to cope with this situation and to look for hope in the future through music?
I definitely think so. I think it's again, everything goes through phases, but it's not just music, but all the arts are a way, not only I think that can be soothing, or, they're a diversion, or for whatever things, but throughout history, it's been the arts in all of its different manifestations that we can have dialogue, and we can talk about things, and we can say things that the news person or the politician or, whatever cannot speak to in the same way. And some people who will hear things through music would never hear, say, a preacher say something.
Right.
But they might hear a Bob Dylan song and Dylan, or, the Beatles or whatever, and be able to accept something they otherwise may not have been able to have a conversation about internally. So I think that is the power of art, which is always ongoing, but definitely through the use, like I'm not so great at social media, but through in this time period for sure, not only my friends, but, all over, if you just turn on, there's been powerful social media that I think is, you wonder what it would be like. Truly the dark ages if we didn't have any of this. And it's because it's a worldwide pandemic. So you think to yourself, wow, how weird would this be if we didn't have these tools that we now have? So
yeah, absolutely.
I think it's pretty cool.
Now, you grew up in the Mississippi Delta. You're the daughter of a Baptist preacher, and a lot of your music centers around that Southern culture, more specifically around the civil rights movement. And you have some just beautiful, poignant, prophetic songs throughout your career. How growing up in that culture, that dynamic, how did that influence you as you now write songs and create music?
Well, I think, well, music, has always been a way for me when I was a little girl to write and have a conversation with myself and my people, however you want to say it, that I could have, and a lot of those things were not talked about any other way. But again, through the arts, you could do that. And for me personally, music was the way. You don't know that when you're 8 years old, your mother's making you take piano. But I was writing, had a ukulele. I was writing from the time I was little. And I think I thought it was the 1960s. I was a little girl in the 60s. But, all the teenagers and everybody, I just thought everybody wrote songs and talked about stuff like that. There was no, I had all my church music and everything, but it was just, I guess I didn't know any better,
Right.
But definitely, as you grow older, I began to understand that for me, it was a way that I could have these conversations, in particular with I mean, I was in church a lot, so there was church songs and all that, but you don't know that you're having theological discussions with yourself when you're 12 or whatever. But obviously I did a lot of church music early on, but again, it was a way for me to talk very early on.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my first songs about things like race, poverty, religion, which are big things, relationship to the land, which are all big Southern themes, in all different literature, whatever. You don't know that when you're younger, but again, I just thought it was, music gave me that way to have that conversation.
Right.
And the older I got, it continued to be the way for me to talk about stuff.
Earlier today, I was listening to some of your songs, and you mentioned growing up and the time period that you grew up in. One of the songs, I think, is Galaxy 500 on the Two Nights in Texas album. I mean, when you go to that car and you're sitting in that car after learning about the King assassination, I mean, it was just so vivid for me to have this little girl sitting in this car contemplating what was going on in the world.
Well, it was so weird. I mean, that was such a vivid image, and I was 7 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a little brother and sister at that time, and for whatever reason, we were in the car, and it was in those days we were at the Kmart, and my mother had left us in the car with the radio on in Nashville, which I've spent most of my life in Nashville,
right,
and
sure.
we were in that. We had moved to Nashville by then, and of course, I knew where Memphis was, though. Who didn't know Memphis and Elvis and whatever? Also from being in Mississippi, but there was something. Even though I was so little, and I've kind of always been attuned to stuff that even when I was a child, I don't know why, but that was a very specific memory of hearing that Dr. King had been shot, and also that people, there was like everybody had to stay in their houses in lots of cities, but particularly even though we weren't in Memphis, we were in Nashville. It was kind of a scary thing. So even a little kid doesn't understand it all,
right?
But they know.
Sure.
Yeah. So one of the very specific events in my life, and music gave me a way to talk about it.
And obviously, a daughter of a Baptist preacher, church is going to be central around your life. But there are also other artists. You already mentioned them here in the interview today. But one is a little bit more poignant now than ever before, and that's John Prine. We unfortunately lost him a few weeks back, and you had some interaction with him in your career.
Well, it's just kind of that's the thing. When I kind of now, like I said, it's been 25 years since, actually, it's been 25 since my very first record came out, that I ended up being in this kind of folk art. People don't really know what to do with me, Americana now, whatever it is, whatever.
Right.
But, I met people along the way. I met Amy Lou.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the way I met John is because I would go out and I would have different players with me sometimes. And as I created more recordings using these great musicians I met along the way, one of them was a guy named Dave Jakes, and he was a bass player. And I'm trying to think when Dave first played, what recording it was. Anyway, Dave has played for I don't know how many years, 35 maybe, with John Prine. And so we got around to doing, my next recording. Dave was playing with me, and he said, would you maybe want John to sing? I think he might want to sing. And my producer, Walt, he couldn't believe. He goes, do you think John would sing on this tune? I go, well, I just have to ask. And, he's the greatest guy. He lived in Nashville. And Dave just called him up, and he said, no problem.
Wow.
And he just came down to the studio, and we sat there for a couple hours, and he sang and I sang, and then I ended up getting to open for him 2 different shows, and it was just awesome up in Kentucky.
That's amazing.
And,
That's
which
great.
is even better. My mom's from Kentucky, and of course, and it was just like
fantastic,
unbelievable.
Wow.
So it's just again one of those things, meeting John Prine.
Sure.
able to meet Emmy Lou along the way.
I love the fact that you just keep calling her Emmy Lou. I mean, as though Emmy Lou, lives down on Cedar Lane. We're talking about Emmy Lou Harris here.
Yes. Well, sorry, I just think everybody calls her Emmy Lou.
Well, Kate's going to be singing a John Prine song for us here in just a bit. But before we get to the song, I do have a couple more questions because I was really moved by some of the music that I've been listening to for years that you have produced, and I was really listening to it preparing for the interview this week. And one of them, going back to the influence of the civil rights movement in the South, really centered on, it's entitled Cotton Field, A Cotton Field Away. And talking about segregation, you begin that song with first a quote by George Wallace and then a quote by Dr. King. And there's this moment, and I'm going to be really honest here. When I heard it, I mean, tears welled up in my eyes. And you talk about a black child's dreams are a cotton field away, while a white man prays, thanking God he's a cotton field away. And it's just that deep racial divide that not only permeated the Jim Crow South, but continues to permeate our culture today. That song is just as important today as it was during the Civil Rights Movement.
That's so crazy. That tune is on the very first recording. Mm-hmm. But my whole life, even when I didn't even know what I was writing about, like I said, music was a way for me to have a conversation with my people where I lived. Even as a child, I was writing songs when I was in elementary school and junior high, but a lot of them were like that. Not even understanding at that point what I was doing, but it was a way for me to have this conversation.
Right.
And Cotton Field Away, I sometimes can't make it through the song through this day because that was the first one. Yeah, that was the first one.
And then on Greensboro, on the KOA tapes, Volume 1, when you talk about the ghost coming out to defend their past, it was like, oh my gosh, those ghosts are still coming out today to defend this egregious past, trying to, somehow defend racism or white supremacy. I mean, your music just is so powerful.
Well, thank you. Like I said, I feel like it's been one long conversation with myself and with God and with people, particularly the people from the South and where I come from, which has been predominantly Mississippi and Alabama and Nashville, Middle Tennessee. Yeah. Okay. But it's just, I think it's the time that I grew up in and the age that I was.
Mm-hmm. And Kate, I got one more question before Autumn asks you our question of the week. And it's a question that you pose in one of your songs for the Living of These Days album. And it is, would they love him down in Shreveport? Now, and we do have to tell listeners, it's not just Shreveport in the song. You take everybody across the country. But it's about, how would the church love Jesus today? Would they reject him as the religious leaders of the day rejected him over 2,000 years ago? So, Kate Campbell, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, I didn't write that song. Isn't that a great song?
Yeah, it's a great song.
I had to record it. As soon as I heard it, that's like one of the greatest songs ever. I think that's, been going on for 2,000 years. Mm-hmm. But I think that culture, I don't know if it's I think possibly, some of it's in the nature of humankind. But there were people who rejected Jesus or any other person, historical people at different times, they reject. Right. And so that song just brings it out, that some people say they love Jesus, but they're not good to their neighbor. Sure. And that's like the greatest, one of the greatest commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, all your mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. And it's in every religion. Mm-hmm. Every religion is about respecting your neighbor. And so it's very interesting. I think we get so, it's so difficult. That's our greatest, we have the capacity to love our neighbors. At the same time, I think all of human beings, we have, it's about survival, and it's people who are not like you, or the only thing that you have is that you are not. I woke up that you are not a Mexican, or you are not a black person,
Mm-hmm.
or a poor person in the same way. But the only thing that you have, if you're a poor white person in the South, is that you're not black or another person of color.
Mm.
So, it's always, how can we, I don't have this and this, but I do have this.
Right. Sure.
And, I guess it's been that way from the beginning of time as we know it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep thinking, wow, we're all in the same boat together. And, coming back to this virus, we're
Right.
all in the same boat together. I just hate to tell people.
Absolutely. Kate, you may be a singer-songwriter, but now you're just starting to preach. So well done.
I'm trying not to. But
No, you're doing great.
Isn't it interesting?
Keep it coming. That's fantastic.
The whole world. It's
Yeah.
not just my neighborhood or the black community or
Right.
the Vietnamese community down the road. It's all of us. We're all in the same boat, and you can all get it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, each and every week on the podcast, we have a question that we pose to our guest. And depending on how lengthy your answer is, then we'll go right into the song after your answer. So, Autumn, what is our question of the week?
Well, I'm glad to finally get a word in edgewise.
I'm sorry.
With you two creatures on this call. I was just going to ask you, our motto at Good Faith Media is there's more to tell. And so we like to ask our guests on the podcast to let us know what your more to tell is. What do you think the world needs to know? Well, maybe you could just sing your more to tell.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good way to do.
Well, this is a cool tune. This is a tune that I wrote with Walt Aldridge. But it's the one that John Prine came, and folks can look it up online too. All my music's out there with John singing with me. It's called "Looking for Jesus." And I remember the day that Walt and I wrote this. He had, he likes, I like a lot of, I like rosaries. I like all kinds of, and I like outsider art or whatever. But we were in Walt's studio, and he had this really weird picture on the wall of, it was like a picture. He said he got it out of a church, and he lives down in Muscle Shoals. And he just found it. He didn't find it like at an antique or junk store, but it was just in some old church, I think he told me. And there was this picture, and he had it hanging there. And we started talking about it, and about how people, they just, pictures of Jesus, and they go to Rome, and they go to, they just want to touch statues. Right. And this, I write about this kind of stuff all the time because it's so interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
There's still, no matter, where you are in the world or whatever, there are things that we just, statues and Jesus and rosaries, and there's just something we're looking for. We want to find. We want to believe.
Right.
That's really what this song, we want to believe somehow.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. That kind of sets up the song, and I think that's what I've been saying. I have great hope for all of us, though.
I love it.
I do.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Kate Campbell's going to inspire us in memory of John Prine with her song, Looking for Jesus.
Yeah, here we go. Let's see if I can do it. Saw it on the TV late last night. Digging a hole at another side. Trying to get the story just right. Looking for Jesus. Every day the bus is rolling. Hoping to retrace its steps again. long to be where the Savior's been, looking for Jesus. Well, up to the mountain, down to the sea, come up the limbs of a sycamore tree so we can see. Push our way through the crowd again, just to get close enough to touch the hem we all want to believe. I heard about a man who saw his face one morning at breakfast in a bowl of cornflakes. Sold it to another soul on eBay, looking for Jesus. Up to the mountain, down to the sea, climb up the limbs of a sycamore tree so we can see. Push our way through the crowd again, just to get close enough to touch the hem we all want to believe. There's a picture of the shepherd hanging there, and all the people who came for prayer wore the paint right off his head, looking for Jesus. We all want to believe, so we keep looking for Jesus.
And there you have it, Looking for Jesus. Kate Campbell, thank you so much. It was a delight to have you on the pod this week. We wish you nothing but the best, and hope we get out of this and you're back on the road producing and just continuing to entertain us all.
Well, thank y'all, and thanks for what you're doing with the podcast. Loving it. So, appreciate it.
Thanks, Kate. Autumn, appreciate having another great show, and hope to see everybody and listen to everybody next week. So this is Good Faith Weekly, and we're signing off. Thanks.